He was a four-star U.S. Army general, but to two patrol officers, he was just another stranger to be thrown away like garbage behind an abandoned warehouse. Sergeant Crowley and Officer Delvis never asked his name. They made their judgment in seconds, and it nearly cost them everything. What they didn't know was that the man they discarded would rise, not with revenge, but with a reform that would transform the entire system. But just wait until you see the shocking twist that turned this injustice into a national reckoning, and why, in the end, justice did prevail. It was just past 2 a.m. when the patrol car rolled to a stop in the derelict lot off Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, on the forgotten edge of northern Atlanta. The air hung thick with the sour stench of old rust and wet cement. An abandoned textile warehouse loomed nearby, its shattered windows staring blankly into the dark. Behind it, a metal dumpster crouched beneath a collapsed gutter, overflowing with torn insulation, plastic crates, and rotting food waste. Sergeant Brent Crowley cut the engine and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. His partner, Officer Mark Delvis, flung open the back door. From the rear seat, they dragged out a bound figure, hands zip-tied behind his back, legs barely moving. "Still breathing?" Crowley muttered, lighting a cigarette without a glance. "Barely," Delvis chuckled. "He'll fit in just fine here." The man groaned as they heaved him toward the dumpster. No words, no resistance. Just shallow, steady breath and the faint trembling of a jaw trying not to break. With a dull thud, he landed amidst a pile of broken shelving. His body twisted unnaturally, like it had learned long ago how to absorb pain quietly. "Another stray," Crowley said, exhaling smoke. "Let the city clean him up in the morning." Delvis grinned as he wiped his hands on his uniform. "Maybe next time he'll know better than to act like he belongs." He spat on the ground and climbed back into the cruiser. The vehicle pulled away slowly, its red taillights vanishing into the misty stillness. Morning crept in gray and cold. Around 6:45 a.m., Miguel Ortega, a janitor who serviced nearby offices, turned his cart toward the alley behind the building. He was humming a tune when he heard it, barely a whisper. "Sir? Sir? Help." Miguel froze. He tilted his head toward the dumpster, heart racing. Carefully, he stepped closer. When he looked inside, he dropped his coffee cup in shock. A man sat inside, upright, his hands still bound behind his back. His face was bruised and swollen. His lips were cracked. But his back was perfectly straight, as if the man were sitting at attention. There was something about the stillness, the control in his posture, that unsettled Miguel more than the injuries. He called 911, breath shaking. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They lifted the man out gently, confused by the lack of reaction. He didn't cry out. He didn't beg. He simply nodded at them once. At the hospital, the ER staff assumed he was disoriented or suffering from memory loss. A psychiatrist was called in. But one nurse, Rebecca Langston, paused when she saw the old scar running down his left forearm. "That's a training scar," she whispered. "Military. And look at his spine posture. That's not from trauma. That's years of discipline." She turned to the attending physician. "This man isn't just anyone." Security was called. The hospital contacted the VA database using a fingerprint scan. Within 20 minutes, the alert reached the Department of Defense. The man's name was General Jacob Elias McKinnon, a four-star United States Army general, decorated veteran of 2 wars, recipient of the Silver Star, twice, and currently the commanding officer of U.S. Army Eastern Command. He had gone out the night before to buy flowers for his wife's birthday. He had left his military ID at home. His civilian clothes were plain. He had stopped briefly in a quiet neighborhood, trying to find an open florist. 2 officers had seen him walking alone. They questioned him. When he asked if there was an issue, they insisted he cooperate. He did. But it wasn't enough. Now, lying in a hospital bed, arms swollen and silent, he finally spoke. Not in anger, not with outrage, but in a tone so calm it chilled the room. "I stepped out of my car to buy roses. I left my ID at home. They thought I was no one. trash. Because I didn't fit their idea of what someone with dignity looks like. Because I'm black. By the time the morning sun reached the rooftops of Capitol Hill, the story had already ignited a firestorm. A single photograph, taken by a hospital orderly in stunned silence, showed a bruised, bound man sitting in the back of a decontamination bay. He was still. His wrists were marked with the ridges of plastic restraints. His posture remained upright, unbroken. His eyes focused. Within hours, it spread like a signal flare through social media. But unlike so many viral images, this one wasn't captioned for mockery or satire. It carried no jokes. Just one line. This man is a U.S. general. And below it, in smaller print, and they left him in the trash. Within 24 hours, every major network in the country had covered the story. CNN aired a breaking segment with historical context. MSNBC featured it as part of a roundtable on accountability. Even Fox News, usually slower to address cases like this, gave it a full segment titled, "Honor Denied, a National Reckoning." Prominent lawmakers condemned the incident publicly. Several senators, both sides of the aisle, called for emergency hearings. And behind closed doors, the White House issued a request to reach the man behind the image. When the President of the United States placed a call to General Jacob Elias McKinnon, the conversation was short, respectful, quiet. The general thanked him. Then he hung up. He refused every interview request, refused to appear on news panels, on talk shows, on podcasts. He broke his silence for only one person, his former aide-de-camp, Captain Lorena Price. Now a documentary filmmaker working with a non-profit Veterans Foundation, she was the only one he trusted to tell the story without turning it into a spectacle. They met in a quiet studio in Arlington. The camera rolled. No crew, no music. Just 2 chairs. He wore civilian clothes. A simple collared shirt. His medals remained at home. His voice, when it came, was steady, but it carried the weight of decades. I wore a uniform for 37 years, led men into battles I don't talk about. I swore to protect this nation's ideals. But that night, I was no one. I wasn't a general. I wasn't even a citizen. I was just a man who didn't look like he belonged. And they threw me away. He paused, swallowing. If that can happen to me, with everything I've done, what happens to the people no one sees? The ones with no voice? No name? The footage was released as part of a short documentary entitled The Weight of Silence. It reached 6 million views in 3 days. But the general never watched it. He said he already knew what it said. And then, quietly, without ceremony, he proposed a reform. A national training initiative, the Second Watch. Its core idea was radical in simplicity. Every officer, regardless of rank or department, would spend 1 full week undercover. No badge, no uniform, no weapon, and no special status. Living anonymously in the neighborhoods they rarely walked. Shopping where their own assumptions had led to mistakes. Listening where they usually gave commands. No simulations, no scripts. Just the experience of being unseen. The idea struck a nerve. It spread through town halls and police departments. Mayors signed on. Activists who had never trusted uniforms found themselves nodding. Veterans lent their voices. State governors opened discussions. Within a month, over 70,000 signatures flooded Congress in support. And so, on a bright Wednesday morning, under the carved marble dome of the Capitol building, General McKinnon arrived for the national hearing. He entered in full uniform, shoulders squared, medals shining with restraint, eyes calm, but alert. When he stood before the committee, silence fell. Even the usual interruptions and partisan friction dissolved as he began to speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't seek blame. He didn't ask for justice in the traditional sense. Justice is not punishment, he said. Justice is education. Justice is a mirror. I'm not here to shame the men who humiliated me. I'm here to give them, and every officer who wears a badge, a chance to see what they've never seen, a chance to understand what they've never had to live. His words hung in the air like a verdict. He stepped down from the podium without applause. But in the silence that followed, The nation finally began to listen. The disciplinary proceedings moved swiftly. Within 3 weeks of the investigation's conclusion, both Sergeant Brent Crowley and Officer Mark Delvis were formally terminated from the force. Their records cited severe misconduct and failure to uphold the constitutional oath. Crowley tried to fight it. He filed a civil suit against the department, claiming his actions were misinterpreted. The case was quietly dismissed after video evidence and testimony contradicted nearly every statement in his affidavit. Delvis didn't fight. He packed his belongings, moved to a quiet town in Louisiana, and legally changed his name. Some said it was to escape attention. Others believed it was shame. But for General Jacob Elias McKinnon, justice wasn't the destination. He refused to let the story end with terminations and silence. He requested that both men, if willing, undergo the full cycle of the newly piloted Second Watch initiative. Punishment doesn't teach, he explained in an interview, but perspective can. The department, though hesitant, agreed. The program's directors reached out. To everyone's surprise, both men accepted. For 6 weeks, Crowley and Delvis were enrolled anonymously in immersive civilian training in one of the lowest-income zip codes in Georgia. They wore no uniforms, carried no weapons, no name tags, no titles, no protection. Just the clothes they were issued on arrival, a small allowance, and a schedule filled with work assignments, community immersions, and guided debriefs with social workers and military trainers. They lived in converted housing blocks, shopped at local stores, sat in public clinics, took buses at night, and for the first time in their adult lives, they saw the world not through a windshield or command, but eye to eye. 2 years later, in the rotunda of the National Law Enforcement Ethics Symposium, Officer Mark Delvis, noticeably thinner, his hair now streaked with gray, stepped up to the microphone. His voice was low, not rehearsed, not polished, but real. I used to believe the badge made me right, that the absence of a uniform meant danger. I never asked where that belief came from. I just followed it. But then I lived in a place where I had no badge, where people looked at me the way I used to look at them. And I was afraid, not of them, but of how wrong I had been. He paused, swallowing hard. I'm not here to apologize to General McKinnon, because he didn't demand it. What he gave me was more than a second chance. He gave me clarity. The auditorium was silent. In the front row, General McKinnon sat motionless, his hands folded. For a long time, he showed no reaction. Then, as Delvis stepped away from the podium, the general offered something no one expected, a slight nod, and the smallest, rarest sign from a soldier forged in silence, a smile. The following year, the Second Watch Initiative, renamed the Perspective Rotation Program, was passed as part of a federal reform package. Within 12 months, it became mandatory training in all 50 states. Each officer, cadet, or veteran, regardless of experience, was required to complete at least one full rotation in civilian immersion. The program was challenging, emotional, for some, transformational. And at the very beginning of every training manual, printed in bold on the first page, were the words the general himself had written. If you can't recognize a general in the man on the street, you may not be ready to wear the badge.